The day the fine arrived, it was 104 degrees outside. Not a single cloud in the sky, just a hazy shimmer radiating off the asphalt like a warning. That morning, I'd filled 2 small coolers with bottled water and rolled them down my driveway in a rusty old wagon, parking them under the community trail shade tree at the edge of my yard. No signs, no speech, no grand gesture, just water. Free, cold for whoever needed it. I didn't do it for attention. I did it because Mrs. Elkins, my 84-year-old neighbor across the street, had nearly collapsed 2 days earlier from heat exhaustion after walking her dog. And because when I was a kid growing up in El Paso, my dad always told me sun water saves more lives than bullets. That voice stayed with me through my time overseas and all the years after. So when I found the white envelope taped to my door that afternoon, I thought it was junk mail or another lawn care flyer. It wasn't. Violation, unauthorized distribution of consumables in common area, fine, $75. Due 14 days. From issuance, HOA Officer Linda Crowley. I remember blinking at the paper standing frozen in the sun-soaked doorway. My fingers curled around it as if it might dissolve in my hand. It didn't. It just sat there, a thin sheet of insult wrapped in HOA letterhead. I looked up and scanned the street. No one in sight. Just the distant hum of a leaf blower and the rhythmic squeak of a sprinkler from 3 houses down. I wasn't angry, not at first, just confused. Was it the cooler, the ice? Did someone complain? Later that evening, I walked over to Mrs. Elkins' house with a jug of filtered water and gently knocked. She opened the door in her housecoat, her oxygen tank hissing softly beside her. "Oh, Jeremy," she smiled. Her voice a little raspy. That cold water earlier was such a blessing. "I meant to thank you." I hesitated, then asked, "Did anyone say anything about it?" She blinked. Who would say anything? The Crowley woman passed by earlier, didn't even wave. That was all the confirmation I needed. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, the letter unfolded beside me. I stared at it while my dog Cooper snored under the table. I'd retired from the Army 6 years ago, and while civilian life had its surprises, I never expected to feel targeted in my own neighborhood for offering someone a bottle of water. I picked up my phone and called the HOA number at the bottom of the notice, straight to voicemail. "Hi, this is Jeremy Cole from 432 Sycamore Lane. I received a notice today regarding water distribution. I'd like clarification on the specific violation. Please return my call." I hung up, then I did what I've always done when something doesn't sit right. I raid. I pulled out the HOA handbook we were given when we moved in 3 years ago. The thing was over 80 pages long. Took me 20 minutes to find the section they were citing. And even then, it was vague: residents must not offer or sell food or drink within common areas without prior written permission from the board. So water was now considered a violation. No sale, no signage, no disruption, just kindness. Apparently, that was no longer allowed in my neighborhood. I didn't sleep much that night, not because of the fine, but because I started seeing something in that notice that I hadn't expected. Control. Not safety, not hygiene, control. The next morning, I attended the regular HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a boxy beige structure that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and bad coffee. I hadn't attended one in almost a year. But I dressed in a collared shirt, took a seat near the front, and waited. Linda Crowley presided over the meeting like a judge in a small-town courtroom. She wore her signature red windbreaker with the HOA logo embroidered over the breast, her personal armor of power. As the meeting neared the end, I raised my hand. She looked at me for a long beat before acknowledging. "Yes, Mr. Cole," I stood up. "I received a fine yesterday for handing out water to neighbors. I've read the handbook. I didn't sell anything. Didn't disrupt anything. I'd like to ask under what authority this citation was issued." Linda didn't blink. Section 12C prohibits distribution of consumables without permission. I nodded. So if someone hosts a bake sale, or lemonade stand, or even gives cookies to a neighbor on the sidewalk, that's a violation. Linda's lips tightened. This isn't about cookies. This is about maintaining order. But that's not what it says. She leaned forward. If you have an issue with the fine, you may submit a dispute form, which will be reviewed by the same board that issued it. A couple of people in the room shifted uncomfortably. I took a breath. You're fining people for doing decent things. That's not order. That's overreach. Her face flushed. Mr. Cole, if you continue to challenge board decisions publicly, you may be subject to additional citations under Section 8F, Disruptive Conduct. I sat down. My jaw clenched. So that's how it was going to be. As the meeting adjourned, a woman I barely knew, Stephanie from Willow Bend, leaned in and whispered, "You're not the only one, Jeremy." I turned to her. "They fined me for handing out Gatorade during the Easter egg hunt last year," she said, eyes flickering toward the door where Linda had just exited. "Said it was unsanctioned hospitality." I felt something click, a shift in the air. This wasn't just about me. It never had been. 2 days after that HOA meeting, I caught Linda Crowley standing on the sidewalk across from my house, arms crossed, lips pursed like she'd sucked a lemon for breakfast. Her signature red windbreaker caught the morning light like a warning flare. The embroidered HOA logo over her chest looked almost like a badge, the way she wore it, proud, untouchable. She wasn't alone. She had Roger Penner with her, the HOA's so-called compliance officer, a wiry man with a clipboard, and the posture of a school hall monitor who never outgrew his love for tattling. They stood there for a solid 10 minutes, eyes darting between the coolers on my porch and the little wooden bench I'd built beside the mailbox. It was as if they'd caught me harboring a fugitive. I stepped out with a cup of coffee, gave them a nod. "Morning." Linda didn't respond. Roger gave a quick scribble on his clipboard. I raised my cup to him. "You got enough ink in that thing." No smile, just silence. They moved on. The HOA handbook said nothing about coolers on private porches, but I knew better than to believe I was safe. Linda was the type to bend the rules like a yoga instructor if it meant tightening her grip. She didn't just enforce the rules, she interpreted them, and that made her dangerous. Later that afternoon, I got a second letter. This time, it cited visual disruption of neighborhood aesthetic due to the improper placement of unsanctioned objects in view from the street. Translation: my bench and coolers were ugly. The bench was cedar. I sanded it myself, even stained it. But in Linda's world, anything not pre-approved was a threat. I sat on that bench for the next hour watching the neighborhood shift around me. Children biked past their parents close behind. A couple walking their dog paused to wave. Mrs. Elkin's caretaker brought out her trash bins. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But I could feel the tension. Like a fault line under the surface, that night I went for a walk. I passed by Linda's house, a 2-story colonial with an overmulched yard and a metal HOA sign in the flower bed, as if she needed to brand her lawn too. There were lights on inside, shadows moving across the blinds. I wasn't spying. I just wanted to understand what kind of person went out of their way to punish someone for a bottle of water. I didn't find answers, but I noticed something: that her car wasn't parked in the driveway. It was parked on the street. That was a violation. HOA bylaw, Monday. Street parking after 10 p.m. prohibited unless hosting guests, and even then only with a permit. I took a picture. Not out of spite, out of principle. If she was going to weaponize the rules, then so could I. The next day, I didn't file a complaint. I just printed the photo and attached a note that said, "Sometimes good people bend the rules for practical reasons, just like you did." I taped it to her front door at 6:45 a.m. By noon, the note was gone. At 3:17 p.m., I got a knock. It wasn't Linda. It was Roger. "Mr. Cole," he said, visibly uncomfortable, "Mrs. Crowley would like to remind you that leaving materials on residence doors is discouraged. Is it illegal?" He blinked. "Well, not exactly, but then I'll keep that in mind." He stood awkwardly for a moment, then added, "Also, you've now received 2 citations. Any further violations may result in a formal hearing." I folded my arms. "Roger, have you ever handed out water to someone on a hot day?" He adjusted his glasses. "That's not the point. That's exactly the point." He left without another word. That evening, Stephanie came by. We sat on the bench with 2 lemonades. Her toddler Maddie played on the grass in front of us. "Linda's on a warpath," Stephanie said. "She fined my neighbor for having inappropriate outdoor decor." It was a wind chime, a damn wind chime. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so typical. She thinks she owns this neighborhood, I muttered. Stephanie sipped her drink. You know, she's not even from here originally. Moved in 4 years ago from somewhere in Arizona. Bought cheap ran for the board 6 months later and hasn't stopped since. She always been like this, Stephanie hesitated. She had a husband. But he left about a year ago. Moved to Denver, I think. Some say it was her need to control everything. Even him. I didn't gloat over that, but it made sense. Control wasn't about rules to people like Linda. It was about fear. Fear of change, fear of people doing things without permission. Fear that kindness might spread and undercut the authority she clung to. I looked across the lawn, saw Maddie picking dandelions with that innocent glee only toddlers have. This place shouldn't feel like a compound. It's starting to, Stephanie whispered. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I felt something stir inside me. Not quite anger, not quite resolve, but something in between. Like the first rattle of a storm too far off to see, but close enough to feel. Maybe it was time to remind this HOA that they didn't own the people who lived here. Maybe it was time we reminded ourselves too. The next morning I woke up to find my bench gone. Not vandalized, not damaged, just gone. It took me a few minutes to convince myself I wasn't imagining it. I walked out in my slippers, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and stared at the empty space where I'd sat with neighbors with veterans who passed by and paused for conversation with Maddie laughing in the grass. There were no notes, no notice. Just a faint imprint in the grass and 2 small scratches in the pavement where the bench legs had stood. I didn't have to guess long. By noon, an email arrived in my inbox. Subject, HOA notification. Non-compliant structures. Dear Mr. Cole, as per bylaw 14B. Any fixture, furniture, or ornamental item placed in the HOA-governed front yards or curb-adjacent areas shall be subject to visual uniformity regulations and may be removed if deemed disruptive to neighborhood appearance. Your bench was removed by maintenance staff this morning in accordance with board decision. Should you wish to dispute this, you may submit a request in writing for review in the next quarterly meeting. Regards, HOA Compliance Board. There it was again, visual uniformity regulations. It sounded clinical, objective, sterile, but what it really meant was anything they didn't like. I stared at the email for several minutes, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could have written a furious response. I could have stormed down to the office, but I didn't. Instead, I printed it out, added it to a folder I'd started paper trail, scrawled in red Sharpie. It already had 3 documents in it: my water citation, the second visual disruption warning, and a copy of Linda's street parking violation photo. Now I added this. That evening, I visited Mr. Jenkins. He lived 2 blocks over in a corner house with a meticulous yard and a Marine Corps flag that waved proudly next to the American one. I didn't know him well, but I'd heard through Stephanie that he once served on the HOA board before Linda. He invited me in, poured sweet tea without asking, and listened as I told him what had happened. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Sounds about right. She's been using that handbook like a battering ram ever since she took over. I leaned in. Can I ask you something? Did any of these rules even exist 10 years ago? He chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. Most of them did. But we enforce them with common sense, context, flexibility. Linda doesn't bend, she breaks people. I told him about the water fine, the bench, the threats. He grew quiet, then said, "You ever hear about Article 27? I shook my head. He went to his bookshelf and pulled out a thick binder. Page 214 there. I read it aloud. If the HOA board is deemed to be acting outside the bounds of reasonable enforcement or fails to reflect the collective interests of the residents, the homeowners may call for a vote of no confidence with 20% petition support and majority quorum attendance." I looked up at him. He smiled faintly. Most folks don't even know that clause exists, buried deep, but it's there. So if I get 20% of the homeowners to sign, you can trigger a vote. And if enough people show up more than 50%, you can replace the whole board. My heart started to beat a little faster. Why hasn't anyone done it? Because they're afraid, or tired, or think they're alone. I left his house with a copy of the clause, more determined than ever. This wasn't about a bench or a cooler. It was about reclaiming a neighborhood that had forgotten what it meant to be one. The next day, I walked through the neighborhood with my dog and a small notepad. I waved at neighbors, struck up conversation where I could. "You hear about Jeremy's water fine," one would say. "He's not the only one," another would reply. Stories poured out. Jane had been fined for a flagstone border. Mark was cited for non-regulation mailbox color. Even the elderly Grangers got a warning for growing tomatoes in raised beds visible from the curb. HOA had turned from a homeowners association into a homeowners adversary. I made a list. Names, house numbers, complaints. I wasn't gossiping. I was collecting data, pattern recognition. Years of quiet frustration were now mapping out before me, one conversation at a time. Stephanie helped too. She designed a simple flyer. "Do you feel the HOA represents you? We're gathering stories and support. Contact Jeremy Cole at 432 Sycamore Lane or email hoatruth@protonmail.com. We distributed 30 of them, quietly folded in mailboxes under doormats, slipped behind flower pots. Within 24 hours, I had 11 emails. By the third day, I had 28, and each one came with a story, a fine, a threat, a silent anger. I started compiling them into a single PDF organized by date, citation, and nature of the offense. I called it the HOA Pattern of Behavior Dossier, and all the while Linda kept doubling down. A woman named Beatrice got a violation for installing a small motion sensor light near her garage. A young couple received a warning for leaving a cardboard box on their porch overnight. Then came the kicker: a teenager selling lemonade was shut down for unlicensed vending. That was it. That was the line. If a teenager with a lemonade stand was now a threat to neighborhood harmony, then the system wasn't broken. It was weaponized. I emailed every contact I'd gathered and wrote, "If you've ever wanted things to change, now is the time. Meet in my garage this Saturday at 6 p.m. Bring your stories, bring your courage." And just like that, the war officially began. It rained the morning of our first meeting. Not a heavy downpour, just that sticky southern drizzle that clings to the skin and soaks the cuffs of your jeans before you realize it. The kind of rain that normally quiets a neighborhood. But not that day. By 5:30 p.m., despite the weather, people began to show up. First was Stephanie with a tray of brownies and her daughter clinging to her leg. Then came Mr. Jenkins, carrying a yellow notepad thick with years of correspondence. A retired teacher named Dolores arrived next, clutching a binder of old HOA newsletters. Within 15 minutes, my garage was filled with mismatched folding chairs, lawn chairs, 2 coolers of water, and the quiet buzz of long-dormant community spirit waking up. By 6, there were over 30 people packed into my garage and driveway, ducking beneath the awning I'd thrown up the night before. They came with umbrellas, ponchos, clipboards, manila envelopes, and stories. I stood at the front, holding a legal pad and a dry erase board I dragged out of my old army storage. A handwritten sign above me read, "We live here. We vote here." I wasn't a public speaker. Never liked being the center of attention. But that night, I didn't need to be polished. I just needed to be honest. "Most of you know why we're here," I began, my voice carrying over the quiet patter of rain on the roof. This isn't about one cooler of water or one fine. This is about years of fear, of silence, of people feeling like they don't own their own homes. There were murmurs, nods. "They've weaponized the rulebook," I continued. "But what they've forgotten is that we are the HOA. They work for us." I pulled out a copy of the Covenant's Article 27 and held it up. "We have the right to call for a vote. All it takes is 20% of residents to sign a petition. If we reach that threshold, and enough people show up to the vote, we can replace the entire board." There was a pause, and then applause. Not roaring, but real. I passed around blank petition forms, pens, clipboards. We discussed logistics, door-to-door outreach email lists, Spanish translations for families on the East End. It felt like planning a mission, purposeful, precise. At the end of the meeting, people lingered. They shook hands, swapped phone numbers, some even hugged. But not everyone was pleased. The next morning, while I was hosing down the driveway, a white pickup truck pulled up in front of my house. The logo on the door read, County Code Enforcement. Two men stepped out, one in his 40s with aviator sunglasses and a clipboard. The other younger, clearly still learning the ropes. Jeremy Cole, the older one asked. That's me. We've had a report of unlicensed gatherings and potential zoning violations regarding public assembly. I blinked. You mean the garage? According to the complaint he read from the sheet you've been hosting, unauthorized public forums with amplified sound systems and blocking pedestrian access. I almost laughed. It was 30 people in a garage having a conversation. He looked up. Any amplified equipment, unless you count a whiteboard and a cooler of water, no. He seemed mildly amused. Can we take a look? I waved them in. The garage was exactly as I'd left it. Chairs stacked, coolers closed, nothing out of the ordinary. The younger inspector scanned the room. Looks like a barbecue waiting to happen. The older one nodded. Look, Mr. Cole, I'm going to be real with you. We get a handful of calls from HOAs every week trying to escalate internal disputes by using county enforcement. Most of the time, it's nothing. We still have to follow up. I understand. Just keep your driveway clear. And maybe don't use a megaphone. I'll try to contain myself. He handed me a copy of the complaint for my records. The name at the bottom didn't surprise me, Linda Crowley. As they left, the younger one glanced back and said quietly, For what it's worth, good luck. Looks like you've got folks behind you. I stood in the driveway after they left, the paper in my hand. The faint outline of where my bench used to sit still damp from the rain. I didn't feel scared. I felt validated. Linda was rattled. She'd called in outside forces. That meant she was watching. That meant she was worried. That same afternoon, I got 3 more emails from neighbors who had heard about the meeting and wanted to help. One of them was a woman named Mariana Chavez, a paralegal with a background in civil governance. She offered to help with legal language and reviewing bylaws. The tide wasn't just turning, it was rising. By the end of the week, we had 56 signatures. The petition only needed 74. I ran into Roger, the compliance officer, while picking up my mail. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. You should be careful, he muttered. The board is talking about emergency authority clauses, meaning they might try to suspend normal voting rights due to hostile organizing behavior. I stared at him. You realize how insane that sounds, right? He didn't answer, just looked down and walked away. It was clear they weren't going to play fair. But neither were we. Not anymore. It was subtle at first, a shift in tone and posture in how neighbors greeted each other across driveways, or slowed their cars to nod instead of waving. The kind of hush that settles before a storm, not of fear, but of focused tension. The day after the code enforcement visit, I noticed the HOA bulletin board at the clubhouse had been wiped clean. Every flyer, including the one Stephanie had posted about a lost cat, was gone. In its place was a single laminated notice centered in bold type, effective immediately. No unpermitted assemblies or petitions allowed on HOA grounds. All materials must be pre-approved by the Compliance Committee. Violators may be fined. No signature, no contact info, just authority, plain and unblinking. At first I laughed, then I realized what it meant. They were trying to erase the momentum. But you can't silence something that's already been spoken aloud. I walked over to the Granger's house 2 streets down. Mr. Granger opened the door in his paint-smeared flannel, a brush in one hand, the smell of wood stain clinging to the air. They took my tomato boxes, he said before I even spoke. Came during lunch, said they were too close to the sidewalk. My wife cried. We've had those beds for 5 years. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry. He waved a tired hand. Don't be. We signed your petition. And we got 2 more neighbors who want to talk. Every visit was like that. No begging. No persuasion, just a growing list of homeowners who were tired of being treated like trespassers on their own lawns. Still, I didn't push publicly. That was the tactic Linda expected. Instead, we worked quietly, garage to garage, stoop to stoop. Late-night emails and driveway conversations with strollers and dog leashes in hand. But HOA wasn't done with me. One morning, I woke to find the HOA Truth at protonmail.com inbox flooded with nearly 50 messages, all junk. Hundreds more poured in over the next 24 hours, some with attachments, some with malicious links. It was a coordinated spam attack. Mariana confirmed it. They're trying to clog your system, flood you with garbage so you miss the real messages. I created a backup email, then a secure cloud folder. We wouldn't be stopped by something so juvenile, but it escalated. 2 nights later, a maintenance worker rang my bell. He held a work order from the HOA to shut off the outdoor electrical line I used for my porch lights. I stared at the paper. "You're joking," he shrugged. "I don't like it either. But the order says this circuit violates energy efficiency guidelines for non-compliant fixtures. These are motion-activated LEDs," I said flatly. "Doesn't matter." I let him do it. Took pictures, filmed it all, added it to the folder. The worst part wasn't even the tactics. It was the silence from the people who used to nod at Linda in meetings, who once sat comfortably in her shadow and now avoided eye contact like it burned. Cowards. But I also started noticing the ones who leaned in, like Rachel, a young mother I barely knew, who left a note in my mailbox with a $10 bill clipped to it. "Use this to print more flyers. I'm with you." Or Malcolm, an Air Force vet who offered to go door to door with me. "Haven't felt this kind of fire in my belly since '04, he said, grinning like a man 30 years younger. And then there was Naomi, a 70-year-old widow who'd lived here since the neighborhood was built. She called one evening out of the blue. "Jeremy," she said, voice trembling, "they fined me for the planter I've had since my husband passed." I asked her what it looked like. White ceramic, shaped like a swan. It's not even in the way. Just sits on my stoop with geraniums. I closed my eyes. "Do you still have the fine? Notice I already paid it." That hit hard. Why? Because I didn't want to deal with them anymore. But now I realize I shouldn't have. I want to help. I added her name to the list. We were at 72 signatures, just 2 short of triggering the vote. That night, I sat on my back porch and stared at the stars. I thought of how Linda must be feeling watching her fortress slowly crack. She'd spent years building her little empire of fear and regulation. But now people were waking up. She must have known the walls were closing in. The next morning, they sent the letter. Certified. Gold seal. Hand-delivered. Notice of formal hearing. Alleged incitement of civil disharmony and violation of Article 11. You are hereby summoned to appear before the HOA Board for a disciplinary hearing regarding the incitement of disruptive behavior, failure to comply with board directives, and unauthorized solicitation of residents. Failure to appear may result in daily fines, legal referral, and suspension of community privileges. It was a last-ditch power play. I could feel the desperation in every word. I called Mariana, read her the letter. She didn't flinch. "They're bluffing," she said. "Article 11D doesn't apply to individual homeowners unless you're damaging property or harassing people. You've done neither. And if they try to fine you without due process, we can file a complaint with the county HOA Oversight Division. What do I do?" She exhaled. "You show up, you bring every single document, every recording, every photograph, and you let them try." I nodded slowly. Then she added, "And Jeremy, bring someone with you. Let them know you're not alone anymore." The night before the disciplinary hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the documents spread before me like a war map. Petitions, citations, emails. Linda's parking violation photo. Naomi's fine. The code enforcement complaint. The official notice with its gold seal still sharp in the corner. All of it. I wasn't afraid of this hearing. I'd stood in rooms with far more danger than this. But there was something about being targeted by your own neighbors, by people who were supposed to have your back, that left a different kind of bruise. The kind that sits under your skin. Quiet. Persistent. By dawn, I was dressed in pressed slacks and a button-down documents sorted in a folder under my arm. But before I left, I heard a knock on the garage door. I opened it to find 30 people standing there. Stephanie, Mr. Jenkins, Naomi, Malcolm, Mariana in a blazer with her legal pad, even Rachel with Maddie in a stroller. "We're not letting you go in alone," Stephanie said, holding a coffee. She handed it to me like a baton in a relay. We talked. We all talked. You started this, but it's not about you anymore. I couldn't speak at first. I just nodded, swallowed, gestured for them to come inside. They filled the garage again, only this time it wasn't about organizing. It was about defending. We reviewed strategy. Mariana highlighted pages in the bylaw printouts. Dolores helped organize the testimonies into bullet points. Mr. Granger brought an easel with photos of his tomato beds before and after removal. It was like preparing for trial, because it was. At 5:45 p.m., we arrived at the clubhouse. Linda was already there, seated at the head of the table like a judge at a tribunal. Behind her sat the other 3 board members, Tom Halliday, Elaine Park, and someone I didn't recognize, possibly new. Roger stood off to the side with his clipboard. Linda's eyes narrowed when she saw the group behind me. I think she expected me to come alone, maybe a lawyer at most. But we came in force. The meeting began stiffly. Linda banged a tiny wooden gavel, something no one had ever seen her use before, probably bought just for this occasion. "We are here to discuss the conduct of Jeremy Cole," she said formally. Specifically, his repeated violations of HOA regulations, disruption of community harmony, and unauthorized solicitation of a residence under the guise of a political campaign. I raised my hand. Point of clarification, are homeowners not allowed to speak to each other about community matters? Tom, to his credit, cleared his throat and looked unsure. Elaine looked at Linda, who did not flinch. "Not when it undermines board authority," Linda replied. I glanced at Mariana. She stood up. With respect, she said clearly, Article 27 of the HOA Charter allows for homeowner-initiated recalls. Mr. Cole is within his rights to petition his neighbors. It's not undermining authority. It is the authority exercised legally by those who live here. Linda's nostrils flared. Roger scribbled. No one responded. I opened my folder. Exhibit A, I said, holding up the fine for water distribution. No sale. No signage. No public health risk. Just water during a heat wave. I passed it to the board. Linda refused to touch it, but Tom took it. Exhibit B, bench removal. Photos dates comparison with other neighborhood benches that hadn't been removed. Exhibit C, targeted code enforcement complaint. A copy of the complaint countered by the report from the inspectors who found no violations. Exhibit D, email, spam attack, traced back to an anonymous domain launched 2 hours after the HOA issued its public bulletin about unauthorized petitioning. I turned to the neighbors seated behind me. They're here not just to support me, but because they have all experienced this too. Fines for tomato boxes, wind chimes, flag colors, raised voices at meetings. Naomi stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held a photo of her swan planter. My husband gave this to me the year before he died, she said. I've had it for 15 years. I was fined $75 for it last week. Her voice cracked, but she stood tall. I paid it. But now I wish I hadn't. Because this isn't how neighbors treat each other. Silence fell over the room. Linda shifted. Elaine looked down. Even Roger paused mid-scribble. Then Mariana delivered the final blow. As of this afternoon, we have 78 verified homeowner signatures on a formal petition to trigger a vote of no confidence. That exceeds the 20% threshold outlined in the bylaws. She walked to the table, laid the petition down. We are requesting the HOA schedule a vote within 15 business days, as mandated. Linda's face paled. For the first time, her voice wavered. This is inappropriate. You're hijacking a disciplinary hearing. No, Mariana said calmly. We're responding to a pattern of overreach that's gone unchecked for too long. Linda looked around, but the board was quiet. Tom leaned forward and asked, Is this true? Mariana nodded. Signatures, addresses, dates, all confirmed. More are coming in. The hearing ended not with a decision, but with a muttered, We'll review this from Linda before she stood and walked out of the room without another word. The room remained still, and then Dolores began to clap. Slow, purposeful. Then Stephanie joined. Then Malcolm. Then everyone. It wasn't a cheer. It was a signal. We see you. We hear you. We're not afraid anymore. The next morning, I opened my front door to find a fresh yellow violation notice folded neatly and shoved into my mailbox slot. No envelope, no explanation, just a printout with bold text, "Unapproved political organizing activity. Cease and desist." I didn't laugh, not this time. Instead, I placed it very carefully into the folder marked HOA Retaliation. It was now over an inch thick. Linda wasn't just clinging to control, she was trying to make an example out of me. What she didn't realize was that her strategy was doing the opposite. Every scare tactic she deployed only added fuel to a growing fire she couldn't put out. We were already past the petition threshold, but we didn't stop. We aimed higher. The new goal was 120 signatures, enough to establish a clear mandate and make it impossible for them to manipulate the quorum numbers. Stephanie created a simple online form hosted on a secure server Mariana vetted. For neighbors who didn't trust tech, we had printed copies handed out discreetly stored in folders in garages and under flower pots shared during walks and conversations at dog parks. Rachel and Dolores organized a group of teens to ride around on their bikes and slide petition flyers into doorways. They called themselves the HOA Paperboys. By the end of the first week, we had 94 signatures. By the end of the second, we had 113. We were close. But Linda wasn't finished. She called an emergency board meeting unannounced to residents and tried to invoke a community emergency clause that would freeze all voting procedures, citing unprecedented disorder. We only found out because Tom Halliday, yes, Tom, one of the quieter board members, leaked the draft proposal to Mariana anonymously. Mariana read it aloud to us in my garage. Her voice was flat but steady. This clause is legally unenforceable, without a confirmed external threat or verified public safety concern, she said. But if they go through with it, it'll buy them time and confuse residents. So what do? I asked. Mr. Jenkins spoke up. We make the vote public, loud, visible, and we hold it whether they like it or not. We scheduled the vote for Saturday 3 weeks out, giving everyone time to organize and prepare. Flyers went up on private property, not public boards. We printed lawn signs. Vote for our voice, Saturday 3 p.m. Town hall, take back our streets, vote HOA recall, and the most popular water isn't a crime. That one went viral. Someone, probably Maddie's teenage cousin, spray painted it on a white sheet and hung it from a tree near the neighborhood entrance. HOA tore it down within the hour. We had a new one up before sunset. Linda, in her classic red windbreaker, began patrolling the neighborhood like a sheriff out of patience. She'd stop at signs, glare at them, scribble in her notebook. Roger trailed behind her with an expression that screamed, "I didn't sign up for this." Then came the incident that turned everything. 3 days before the vote, Naomi called me in tears. "They've threatened to suspend my access to the clubhouse pool," she sobbed. Said my support of hostile activities violated community trust. It was too much. I picked up the phone and called the county HOA oversight office. Spoke to a supervisor named Carla Murray. She listened quietly, then said, "This isn't the first complaint we've received about your HOA leadership, but this is the most organized response I've seen. File a formal grievance. I'll expedite the review." We filed the paperwork that same day. By now, support was flooding in from outside the neighborhood too. Friends of residents, local veterans groups, even a nearby firehouse captain who'd once received a cold bottle of water from me during a street cleanup. The morning of the vote, I walked out to find my front yard covered not in violations, but in hand-painted signs. "Thank you, Jeremy. My tomato plants salute you. I vote yes." Taped to the mailbox was a note in Naomi's delicate handwriting. "You reminded us we still have power. You reminded me I'm not alone." Today we remember what community feels like. I stood in the driveway, with Cooper at my side, the sun barely breaking through the pines. There was a stillness in the air, like the breath before a shout. At 2:30 p.m., the parking lot at Town Hall was full. People walked from 3 blocks away, pushed strollers, helped elders out of cars. They brought lawn chairs, water bottles, sun hats, umbrellas. It looked like a 4th of July picnic without the fireworks, just resolve and quiet unity. Mariana checked in voters against the HOA's resident registry. By 2:45, we had confirmed over 160 residents present. At 3 sharp, I stepped up to the small podium in front of the community room and cleared my throat. My name is Jeremy Cole. I'm a homeowner. I'm a veteran. I've lived here for 3 years, and like many of you, I came here for peace, for community, and for a place to belong. What I didn't come for was fear. I didn't come to be fined for kindness. I didn't come to be monitored for handing out water. I didn't come to watch elderly neighbors be silenced or kids be shut down for lemonade stands. I came for what we all came for: home. Today is not a protest. It's a promise that from this point forward, no one will be ruled by fear in their own neighborhood. There was no applause, just the stillness of hearts being spoken to directly. Then Mariana took over to conduct the vote. Paper ballots, 1 per household, verified by ID and address. A row of folding tables with dividers served as makeshift voting booths. The lines snaked down the sidewalk. At 3:47 p.m., the final vote was cast. At 4:20 p.m., the counting began. At 5:03 p.m., Mariana stepped back up to the podium. Her voice trembled just slightly. The motion to recall the current HOA board has passed by a vote of 190 to 13. The silence broke. Cheers, laughter, hugs. Some wept. Even Mr. Granger tried to fist bump me with his stained gloves. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I looked to Linda standing off to the side near the edge of the parking lot, her arms crossed, face unreadable. She turned and walked away. No words, no gavel, no more power. You'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think 190 votes, 190 voices, raised in a single unified. Enough would be enough to finally bring peace. But people like Linda Crowley don't disappear quietly. Not when power has been their entire identity. The morning after the vote, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop. Texts, calls, notifications piling up. Check your mailbox. Jeremy, a look at the HOA website. Is this even legal? I threw on a sweatshirt, walked out barefoot across my porch, and opened the mailbox. Inside was a thick, stapled packet wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve. At the top was the HOA letterhead, but the signature at the bottom wasn't Linda's. It was Elaine Park, the board member who'd barely spoken at any meeting before now. Her title, acting president of the Temporary Emergency Administrative Council. The contents of the packet were surreal. They claimed that the recall vote had been procedurally invalid, citing obscure clauses about meeting notification windows and alleged ballot irregularities. Apparently, since the vote wasn't held in the HOA clubhouse, but at town hall, and because a few lawn signs had used unapproved messaging, the entire process could be voided. In bold letters across the first page, all board members are to retain their current positions until a formal hearing by the HOA's Legal Advisory Committee. I stood there in the morning chill holding the document with both hands, my breath puffing out like steam. Cooper trotted out beside me and nudged my leg, but I barely felt it. Linda hadn't accepted defeat. She'd simply retreated, and now she was trying to claw her way back using legal fog fake technicalities and a brand new puppet board to buy time. I called Mariana. She was already on it. They filed a provisional injunction with the HOA Oversight Council, she said grimly, claiming you and I incited a non-compliant vote. Can they do that? They can try, but it won't hold. She was right. Legally, they didn't have a leg to stand on. But procedurally, it meant weeks of hearings, email chains, and formal rebuttals, the same strategy they'd always used: delay, confuse, exhaust. Only this time, they weren't dealing with a silent community anymore. We convened again that night, this time in Dolores's garage. It was smaller than mine, but packed wall to wall with people. The Grangers brought hot cider. Rachel brought muffins. Jenkins brought copies of the original HOA charter in case anyone still needed convincing we had the right. I looked around the room and realized something: Linda's retaliation wasn't scaring anyone. It was making us stronger. Let them file their injunctions, Mariana told the group. Let them stall. It doesn't change the fact that 190 homeowners voted them out. But what if they drag this on for months? Stephanie asked. I mean, they're already threatening to freeze the HOA budget. I spoke up. Then we stop playing defense. We go on the offensive. That's when the strategy changed. Mariana proposed we submit a formal complaint to the County Legal Ethics Committee citing abuse of administrative process and obstruction of democratic action. Dolores began compiling a full public archive, an online website with every document, every citation, every vote, every HOA maneuver since 2019's. Rachel coordinated a newsletter to go out weekly, ensuring that no resident was left in the dark again. We didn't just want to win the vote anymore. We wanted transparency. We wanted protections. We wanted to rebuild the HOA into something that actually resembled the community it was supposed to serve. A week after the recall vote, Linda and Elaine sent another letter, this one threatening legal action for defamation against anyone distributing flyers or newsletters without authorization. It was laughable, but still intended to intimidate. We responded with visibility. We held an open town meeting at the local library. 85 residents attended. We invited the press. A local columnist from the county newspaper wrote a front-page editorial titled Homeowners Association or Hostage Organization, The Story Caught Fire. It wasn't just about us anymore. People from other neighborhoods, other HOAs across the state started reaching out, sharing stories, offering support. Some asked for copies of our petition template. Others asked Mariana if she could advise their own legal battles. We had unintentionally lit a spark, a movement, and it was growing. 2 weeks after the attempted injunction, Carla Murray, the same contact from the County HOA Oversight Office, called me personally. "We've reviewed the filing," she said. "Their claim is being dismissed, effective immediately." I nearly dropped the phone. "They have 48 hours to vacate their board positions," she continued. "If they attempt to interfere again, they'll be subject to penalties and possible disbandment of the HOA under Article 42. I hung up and sat down in stunned silence. Then I grabbed my phone, typed up the message, and hit send. We won. They're out. For real this time. 15 minutes later, my street erupted in cheers. I stepped outside and saw Naomi crying on her porch. Mr. Jenkins raised his American flag. Stephanie popped a bottle of something sparkling and poured it into paper cups for everyone within 10 feet. And then, out of nowhere, a little white truck drove down the street. It was the same maintenance guy from weeks ago, the one who'd been ordered to disconnect my porch lights. He slowed when he reached my driveway, rolled down the window and grinned. "Need anything reconnected?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. "You know what? Yeah. Let's turn the lights back on." The second vote wasn't supposed to be necessary. But after the failed injunction, Linda's camp didn't go quietly. They clung to their posts like a bad smell, insisting they'd appeal to higher authorities, draft amendments, or stall us into fatigue. But they underestimated one thing. This community had tasted unity, and there's no going back after that. So we planned the final vote, the formal indisputable permanent election, to replace the board. Not just recall, rebuild. The county approved the process. We sent certified notices to every homeowner. We reserved the local high school gymnasium bigger public impossible to dismiss as unauthorized. And this time, we weren't asking for justice. We were delivering it. I didn't run for anything. I made that clear from the start. I'm not here to be in charge, I told the planning team. I just want to live in a place where handing out water doesn't make you an outlaw. Mariana ran for secretary. Dolores ran for treasurer. Malcolm, God bless him, ran for vice president. And for President Naomi, 70 years old, widow, soft-spoken, never led anything before. But she stood at the front of our final planning meeting and said in her quiet voice, "I don't want power. I want peace." And I think that's what most of us want. So let's try something radical. Let's listen to each other. That was all it took. The night of the vote felt like a block party with ballots. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Teens handed out flyers and stickers that read, "Let's make home feel like home again." Kids ran across the gym floor while folding chairs scraped and squeaked across hardwood. No red windbreakers, no threats, no silence. Just community. By 6:45 p.m., the line wrapped around the building. We'd expected 100, maybe 150. By 7:00 p.m., 236 residents had shown up. Linda didn't. Neither did Roger, or Elaine, or Tom. They'd folded the minute the county upheld the first vote. The new board members took their places at the front of the gym, flanked by folding tables, clipboards, and volunteers checking names off a list. Each resident received a sealed ballot, signed it, dropped it into a clear acrylic box, transparent, accountable. Exactly what the HOA had failed to be for years. I stood at the back near the bleachers, didn't speak, didn't guide, just watched, and when it was time, I cast my vote last. Ballot number 237. Checked 5 boxes, folded it once, dropped it in. That was it. No speeches, no yelling, no drama, just democracy. By 8:10 p.m., the count was done. Mariana stepped to the podium, tired but glowing. She looked out at the crowd, held the envelope in both hands, and took a long breath. Then she smiled. You've elected Naomi Green as president of the new HOA board unanimously. Dolores Brightman is your treasurer. Malcolm Reyes is vice president. And I've been chosen as secretary. We are here to serve, not to rule. Effective immediately, all prior disciplinary actions issued under the previous board are voided. All citations related to non-hazardous visual violations are nullified. And every resident will be receiving a complete clear copy of the HOA charter with your right to vote speak and question highlighted in bold. The room erupted, not in a roar, but in release. Cheers, tears, laughter. I even saw a couple quiet types I'd never met hold hands like they were watching their wedding vows get renewed. Naomi stepped up last. She looked so small behind the microphone, but her voice was firm. This is not a reset. This is a rebirth. She nodded once. We lost trust. We lost kindness. We lost the belief that neighbors are meant to take care of each other. But tonight we found that again. She paused, smiled directly at me. And I think we owe that to someone who reminded us what leadership without ego looks like. The crowd turned toward me. Applause rose like a wave. I didn't know what to do. I just shook my head and mouthed, "Thank you." It wasn't about me. It never really had been. But it had started here. With a cooler of water and one fine too far. After the crowd thinned, I sat on the edge of the gym's bleachers sipping a warm bottle of Gatorade someone handed me. Mariana came over, sat beside me. You know, she said, I think this might make the news again. I hope it doesn't, I said, chuckling. I'm tired of being the guy with the cooler, she smirked. But you were the guy who made us remember that we make the rules around here. I just want to be the guy who gets to sit on his porch in peace, I said, and maybe build a bench again. She bumped her shoulder against mine. You earned it. We watched Naomi walk across the empty gym floor. She paused under the basketball hoop, looked up at the lights, then turned slowly, arms crossed, peaceful. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt at home. It's been 6 months since that final vote. Sometimes I still catch myself waiting for the next fine to arrive in the mailbox. Old habits die hard, especially when you've spent years in a neighborhood that treated neighborliness like a misdemeanor. But now, the only things that show up are newsletters, Naomi's hand-signed updates, and occasionally a thank you card from someone who just moved in. We have new benches now. Not fancy ones, just simple cedar handcrafted by volunteers. Mine sits proudly in its old spot right beside the shade tree at the corner of my yard. No one touches it. No one threatens to remove it. Instead, someone, maybe Naomi, maybe a stranger, places fresh flowers there every week. And the cooler, still there, always stocked. Now with a little sign on top, take one, or leave one. Just stay hydrated. The HOA looks nothing like it used to. Mariana implemented a rule requiring all new board proposals to be posted publicly 7 days before any vote. Dolores created a transparent accounting page where every dime is tracked and posted monthly. Malcolm leads a bi-weekly community walk to hear concerns face-to-face, no agenda, just ears open. And Naomi, she chairs the meetings with grace and quiet conviction, always starting them with the same words. We're here to serve the neighborhood, not police it. It's almost strange how calm it is now, how normal. But maybe that's what happens when fear is replaced by fairness, when silence is replaced by conversation, when pettiness is replaced by purpose. A few weeks ago, something happened I didn't expect. I was in my driveway tinkering with Cooper's new dog ramp when Linda Crowley's car pulled up. She stepped out slowly, no red windbreaker this time, just a plain gray cardigan and slacks. Her hair looked thinner, her shoulders smaller. Or maybe I was just seeing her without the armor for the first time. She walked halfway up the drive, stopped. "I wanted to talk," she said quietly. I stood, brushed off my hands. "You're brave to show up." She nodded. "I know." A long pause. "I was wrong," she said, looking not at me, but at the ground. "About a lot of things. I didn't speak." She glanced up. I thought I was protecting something. The neighborhood. The order. "But I think I just didn't know how to let go." I crossed my arms. "Of power." She shook her head. "Of fear." That surprised me. She looked away, blinking faster than usual. After my husband left, after my father passed, rules were the only thing I could control. They made things make sense. I exhaled slowly. "You hurt a lot of people, Linda. I know." Another pause. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a check for $75. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, setting it on the bench, "but I wanted to pay back the first fine. The one for the water. It never should have happened. I didn't move, just watched her." Then she turned to go. "Linda." I called after her. She stopped. "You don't need to pay me, but maybe come to the next HOA meeting. Sit in the back. Listen. Maybe even speak." She nodded once. "I might." And then she drove away. Not defeated, but maybe freed. The neighborhood feels alive now. Kids sell lemonade without fear. Elderly neighbors tend to their gardens without hiding their tomato plants. We hold a monthly potluck in the park HOA once banned block parties from. The food is always too much. The stories are always longer than planned. And no one ever finds you for bringing a folding chair. Last week, Naomi introduced a new resolution to turn the old HOA clubhouse into a shared space, part library, part co-op workspace, and part cooling center for heat waves. The vote passed unanimously. And when she asked me if I'd be willing to design the cooler station for it, I said yes without thinking. Because I remembered something my father once told me long before El Paso, long before the Army, long before HOA fines and laminated notices. You're not just a neighbor when you move in. You're a neighbor when you show up. When you offer something without expecting anything back. That's what the water was, really. Not just kindness, but defiance. Not just resistance, but hope. And so now when I sit on the bench in the late afternoon watching the light stretch across the lawn, I don't think about the fines or the threats, or the way Linda used to scribble in that notebook like she was sketching battle plans. I think about Naomi's swan planter blooming again. I think about Rachel and Maddie waving as they ride past on their bikes. I think about the old man on Sycamore Lane, who used to hide his flag in fear of color violations, and now flies it with quiet pride. And I think about water. Cold, simple, shared. No longer a violation, just neighborly.